Good day, everyone. I am Idana Marie C. Gaviola, and today I will be discussing the second half of the topic Fairness, Ethics, and Standard. So, let us first talk about on power and pessimism. So, in a famous commentary on test, Foucault in the year 1975 claims that all examinations are symbol of control and power. So the examination combines the technique of an observing hierarchy and those of normalizing judgment. It is a normalizing gaze, a surveillance that makes it possible to quantify, classify, and punish. It establishes other individuals' a visibility through which one differentiates and judges them. That is why, in the mechanism of discipline, the examination is highly ritualized. For Foucault, the evolution of the education test is a form of control, in which the test takers are turned into objects to be measured and classified. The whole notion of knowledge is a construct used by the powerful to oppress the weak and keep them under control. This postmodern reworking of the Marxist view of knowledge is deeply embedded in a philosophy of ethical relativism, where the rules, values, and the modes of behavior that are encouraged are those that privilege the powerful. For the postmodern thinkers, talk of ethics and fairness is simply that talk. It is lodged within the discourse that is created within the specific groups in order to normalize the behavior. This approach to consistency of practice from test creation through delivery to the reporting of results is very much perceived by the organization as ensuring fairness through the equal treatment of test takers. So this is according to Van Avermaet on the year 2004. Yet, they argue that the standards cannot be imposed, merely used to encourage best practice and the maintenance of minimally acceptable standards among their own members. In the postmodern society, they argue that one has to be cautious about setting standards because the attraction of those in power or who have the most prestige in the eyes of other members of the group needs to be counteracted. The discourse of social and cultural diversity is used to explain why standards cannot be imposed upon other members of the organization. The acceptance of relativistic paradigm means that the quality management system cannot be implemented within a single organization unless the individual members buy into the system. Similarly, in the first decade of the 21st century, the International Language Association, or the ILTA, has tried to develop a code of practice that will guide language testing practice around the world, building upon the successful acceptance of its code of ethic in the 2000. The search for agreement on the principles has been in vain, even though many local language testing organizations has been able to develop their own code of practice. The primary reason for this appears to be that the code of ethics can contain a very broad and vague principles upon which there can be general agreement. If these become too specific, or if the content places constraints upon the actual practice, or what Trasher refers to as the minimum requirement for practice in the profession, agreement becomes much more difficult. If there can be no agreement on the values that we place on the key concepts such as validity, it is unlikely that the agreement could ever be reached on what constitutes to be what we call the best practice. Camplion argue that the growing interest in ethic is related to the fact that language testers have had a positivist approach to their discipline, that the object of our inquiry really exists. She argues that this is not the case. She anchors processes from test design to interpretation, from research to score use, firmly within the exercise of power, as all language testing is a political act. Camplion expand upon this with an explicit statement of what ethical language testing is under postmodernism. Under the influence of postmodernism, we cannot avoid acknowledging the contingent nature of knowledge nor the fact that the different stakeholders or groups will have competing goals and values. The combination of expanded views of stakeholders and accountability with a growing acceptance that the truth is not out there but in us has made many language testing professionals question what they do and how they do it. This is what I mean when I refer to ethical language testing. Hamplion takes a postmodern perspective because it opens up an awareness and sensitivity to the difference and variety, creating a concern for the minority and underrepresented society. This insight we would call an ethical, even from pragmatic position. The real question is whether the epistemology that underpins this kind of postmodern compassion deprive us the ability to set ethical standards across culture. Thus, when it comes to posing questions about whether test developers are responsible for test uses that are not within their original stated purpose, culture on the year 1999 has argued that there can be no answer within a postmodern paradigm because there are different ethics for different societies. Next, taking power into account. The preceding discussion does not imply that tests are not used to maintain power of sections of society, nor does it imply that tests are not misused. We can agree with Hamplion's that testing is a political act and an instance of exercise of power. However, this can equally be good for the individual test takers and society. Shohami on the year 2001 has explored these aspects of ethic of language testing further than anyone else. Taking Foucault as her starting point, Shohami argues that tests are instruments of power because of the six factors. The first one is tests are administered by powerful institution. So test takers take the tests that are set by organization that have the complete control over the type of content that of the tests that are set. These tests prioritize what is considered to be important by the educational system, the government, or the society. Failure to get the appropriate grade can therefore lead to fewer educational or work opportunities. The second one is test use the language of science. The use of statistics and the presentation of test and examination in scientific terms gives the process authority so that the public can make assumption that testing systems are fair and trustworthy even if they're not. The third one is test use the language of numbers. The use of numbers is endemic in the society and the media. Quoting number in a report, even if these are questionable, gives the report an air of authority. Number four, tests are written in form of communication. Introducing the written test, which there is no communication, increases the sense that the process was scientific. Test takers required to demonstrate the knowledge, what is valued without being able to interpret that knowledge. The fifth one is reliance on documentation. Test results can be recorded and documented so that each individual has a file that can be used for comparison with others, as well as classifying and judging the individual. A permanent record of the person is created that exists forever. And the last one is test use objective formats. The truth is contained in the test as most tests contain items to which there is a correct response. This is even the case with some constructed response items or tasks, where the format and scoring procedure limit what can be said and what can be valued. So within the centralized education system, Shohomi argues that these features allow exceptional level of control when state-level high-stake tests can be introduced. These control can include access to higher education and the ability to impose a national curriculum on all schools and colleges. So many countries tests are also used to monitor teacher effectiveness, produce school league tables, and intervene to remove teachers from their posts. They may even be used to close schools when test scores are not considered to meet some externally set bureaucratic targets. So, Shohomi, on the year 2001, discusses a number of tests introduced at national levels and interprets them in Foucault's term as an act of authority that introduces surveillance to quantify compliance, classify into failing and non-failing, and punish the failing. Tests can therefore be used to ensure preeminence of the knowledge valued by the society's elite, thus maintaining the status quo. Next, we have language testing and gatekeeping. So many countries around the world uses language testing as a method of controlling immigration. This is done because countries would accuse of racism if the controls were to be openly imposed without some pretext. As David makes clear, the argument put forward by the countries concerned is that a certain level of English is necessary for an immigrant to integrate with society and find a gainful employment. It is not only the English speaking countries that are engaged in this kind of gatekeeping. It is now common across European Union. The practice using this test in this way appears to have a little to do with language skills necessary for employment, but rather whether they can claim cultural identity with the host country. The archetypal example of this practice is the Australian dictation test. This was introduced as a part of the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901, which was the first major piece of legislation of the newly independent country. And at the same time, Australia was experiencing significant immigration from Asia, and the number of immigrants had begun to alarm the white workers, who feared for their job. So pressure had grown on politicians to limit the number of immigrants, but this could not be done openly. Britain still had considerable influence over Australia, and Japan was Britain's main ally in the East. Any immigration act in the Commonwealth country could not therefore specifically target immigration from Asia. So, in order to overcome this problem, a dictation test was introduced that allowed officials to exclude individuals on the basis of race, without race being the explicit reason for the decision. So the dictation test were to be 50 words or more in length and at a level of difficulty that would result in failure. So next we have the language test for immigration. The use of test as instrument in the immigration policy in Australia has not abated. So Hawthorne in the year 1997 relates the story of the Access tests that were developed in the 1990s to limit the flow of skilled migrants to Australia. Although the test was designed to high technical standards, its political role was made particularly in the year 1996, when the government wished to reduce the immigration and achieved this by raising the pass mark on the test. So conversely, the development of STEP, or the special test of English proficiency, was developed in the mid 1990s to assist the Australian government in accepting larger numbers of immigrants without appearing to be letting anyone into the country without any kind of control. So, in short, Australia found a large number of immigrants from China were not returning following the events in Tiananmen Square in 1989, and their claims to remain in Australia had become a drain on court time and national resources. The STEP test was designed to allow immigrants to pass so that, as Hawthorne said, STEP had a capacity to deliver the Australian government a solution which is timely, cheap, and administratively simple, almost wholly on a user-pays basis. Bishop, on the year 2004, highlights two problems language testers have with issues of immigration. Firstly, The work of language test developers may be used for purposes which are not obvious to us either at the time that the test was designed or subsequently. Second, even if we believe that the use of a test to restrict or enable immigration is unethical, there are likely to be others in the professional community who would disagree. As Davis says, there may be benefits to ensuring that those who enter the country are either culturally compatible with the host nation or are likely to wish to integrate. This is the argument of the cultural stability, which should not be confused with xenophobia. Or we may simply take the view that relying on language tests is a fashion, and this fashion is unethical because it allows liberal democracies to take decisions that could not be admitted in public. The next subtopic that we will be discussing about is the professional conduct standards for practice. So the ILTA, or the International Language Testing Association Code of Ethics, sets out a broad ethical principles, but does not constrain or prescribe practice at all. Standards on the other hand, provide much more detailed guidelines for professional conduct. Davidson, on the year 1997, outlined the different meanings that standard can have in language testing. Here, we are concerned with the first of their definitions. A standard can refer to a guideline for good practice. So say for example, an important standard for education tests is that their developers should demonstrate evidence of test validity. This meaning equates standards in plural with a code of professional practice or sets of professional guidelines which could cover all the stages of test development, from initial construction through trialing and on to operational use. Davidson, in the year 1995, undertook a large-scale survey of standards by contacting agencies around the world involved in language testing. They received responses from 110 agencies and reported that only 53.7% of respondents were able to send relevant documents. They report that within the percentage, there was a significant variability with regard to the quality of documentation and understanding of what the professional standards are. Nevertheless, a clear link has been made between practicing as a professional and adherence to some form of professional standards. We will focus on the best known standards of the AERE. The standards for educational and psychological testing are probably the most frequent cited standards available, although the Code of Fair Testing Practices is also widely used. So next, we will also be talking about the responsibility of language testers and their limitation. A critical question is the extent of the responsibility of the language testers for the use of the test that they create. On the other hand, are those who extend the responsibility for both intended and unintended test use to the society in general. This is according to Hamplion on 1997. On the other hand, there are also those who would limit the responsibility to within reasonable limits. That is also according to Davis on the year 1997, which is the most common limitation within professional code of practice. Shohami on the year 2000 advocates the development of shared responsibility by involving all the stakeholders in the decision-making process, a stance which we strongly agree. So Stanfield on the year 1993 contains a rare discussion of cost versus quality. He recounts a story of a test development project in which he was asked to develop tests and refused to undertake the contract because he did not believe the figure on offer was enough to do the work to meet the professional standards. The contract was given to a company that was prepared to work within the funds available, and the test was ultimately not usable for its stated purpose. One thing that all language testers are now agreed upon is that the positive washback is something that language testers should plan for, even if there is no clear evidence of how this can be planned. This is according to Messick on the year 1996. So next we have account. The standards era, 1999, have been cited in U.S. court cases, Davidson et al. 1997, which also makes them relevant to issues of accountability to test takers. This becomes an issue in a jurisdiction where equal protection legislation of any kind has been introduced, and therefore a perception of unfair treatment can lead into legal action. Fulcher and Bamford 1996 review key legal cases involving testing, primarily in US or United States. These mainly involve cases where discrimination against subgroups of the population has to be established, particularly discrimination by race, gender, or disability. In these cases, it is necessary to establish that the outcomes of the testing have led to differential treatment and or the reduction in the opportunities for the group of individuals from this group. So we have argued that a postmodern perspective on ethics and fairness is language. Testing leads to relativism, which is a counsel of despair. On the other hand, we cannot find a basis for fairness in absolutism. Such a position would force us to seek a universally agreed principles of action that lie in a universe that is not unfolding like our own, but exists separately and internally, in what James referred to as the edition deluxe. The problem is that each culture or religion has radically different views on what deluxe edition contains. The basis for international professional practice, like democracy, cannot therefore lie in another world. Our solution to this problem lies in the pragmatic maxim of Peirce, which translates into design a test with its best future effects in mind. When they are asked, better by what criterion, they have no detailed answer, any more than the first mammal could specify in what aspects they were better than a dying dinosaur. Rather, when we have to appeal to the notion of engagement with a professional community which will lead us in a direction that we cannot yet predict, but we believe will be better, just as our current practice is better than which led to the practice of the mass sterilization, incarceration, and ultimately death camps of the Nazis. That's all. Thank you for watching.